Hey everybody, so I wanted to go into something that I think will be useful for people. And it really comes down to the idea of not just what we're learning in Jiu-Jitsu, and even more than how to learn in Jiu-Jitsu. One of the things that I in particular spend a lot of time on, and in particular 40 plus BJJ over the years, is talking about a methodology for learning, and then specifically tailoring that to the needs of people who, are no longer, 25 years old and athletic and all of that. So some of the demons that I encounter, like the Jiu-Jitsu demons I encounter, are these sort of memes that persist throughout the Jiu-Jitsu community and sometimes get bound up in, ego and ethos and things like that, which is, I'll see it resurface in the group all the time, the 40 plus Jiu-Jitsu group, but I see it in other groups too, is you get people that kind of come on with this attitude, which I've talked about before. They say, yeah, all you need to do is just train hard, suck it up, get through it, just go hard. And, to some extent, that's not wrong, because just train, if you're talking about, well, you have to put in the time on the mat, Yes, so I don't want to hear people complaining if they haven't put in a requisite amount of time on the mat. That's true. And just train's correct insofar as, like, sometimes you need to just not get too caught up in, whatever happened today. You need to just get back out there, and you need to be persistent and actually put in that time and embrace the process, the journey, not just look for the result, not get too caught up in, your head. All that's true. But the thing is, it's usually not it's not limited to there, right? People get all caught up in, just kind of thinking like, I get everything I need just from, going in and training hard. Do you? Because the thing is, when I actually take a look at what people who say that are doing, and I look at the product, and I look at, a lot of times, like, what sort of obstacles they run into years later after they first started adopting that mentality, which a lot of times maybe they got from their peers or even from their instructor. Or I start to look at the amount of athleticism that they're relying on in their training, even if they're very good. All these things, it makes me really appreciate that it's important to look at the process. And when I say that, I mean, it's important to look at your approach to Jiu-Jitsu, how you're learning, how you're solving problems, and where you put your focus and what you put your value on, right? In other words, is the value always on just winning, or is it trying to win with as efficient an approach as possible, okay? Building a game that will give you longevity even when you don't have the athleticism. And there's times where you're going to bring the athleticism into play, such as if you're competition training or actually in competition or training to fight or what have you, right? Or if you actually are in a fight, like, and for sure, whether it's in like an MMA competition or a street fight where, things can go horribly wrong. Use whatever you got. You're real strong, use it. If you're real explosive, use it. But I don't want you to rely on that in training. But also, just to go beyond that, is a lot of times I see this on even a bigger picture. And I think this is where I want to talk about today. Because a lot of times, even people who are excellent technicians, operate from a certain paradigm that ultimately can hold them back. And the paradigm I'm talking about is basically the difference between principles-based approach, and a lot of times people kind of say, oh yeah, I like concepts and everything, but a lot of times what I find is from a certain paradigm, you may look at the concepts, but you're still thinking kind of on a component basis. So it's principles-based approach versus a components-based approach. How does that play out in Jiu-Jitsu terms? Well, we've got core principles, and then on the other side, we've got kind of a component like a technique for technique thinking, or a technical game thinking, like so-and-so developed this game, and then it kind of took hold, and then everybody started playing this particular game. So now I got to learn that, and I'm going to study all the best people at that game. And then as people started to adapt their jiu-jitsu to that game, then this other game kind of branched out in response to it. And so now I got to go learn that, right? And it's not to say that any of those things are bad, but it is a reflection of how a component-based, a linear mentality rather than a like kind of holistic principles-based mentality can actually pull you further and dilute you further from the jiu-jitsu that you personally should be developing based on a number of factors, one of which is your body, how your body moves and articulates, also your thought process, because your personality and your thinking is kind of inextricably tied into how you move and how you express your jiu-jitsu in real time. So principles-based for me is where I always try and steer everybody, because the worst thing I want is to have students that are replicas of me, right? Because in a room of, if we have like 100 students, there may be a couple that have a game that very closely resembles me, because maybe personality-wise and build and all that stuff, it's great, but I don't want that, right? Ideally, I really want to have the students that are really taking the core principles and developing their own expression of jiu-jitsu stylistically and technically around those. So a couple examples I give, because I think it's always useful to study high achievers in other areas. So I'll give you an area completely distinct from jiu-jitsu, which is taking a look at a couple of notable modern billionaires. So there's Elon Musk with Tesla, and we were just having a conversation about this. So Elon Musk basically told that Tesla couldn't be viable when he was trying to put it together. And one of the main reasons was the batteries are simply too expensive, okay? Because when you look at how much it's going to cost to source the batteries, there's no way to make this work in a mass-produced economic model. And what Elon Musk did is he talks about this. You can actually watch the interviews where he goes into this. He said, I go back to first principles deductive logic versus reasoning by analogy, which is basically like opinion and hearsay and taking, only thinking within the frame of existing models. And I want to instead apply first principles reasoning and deductive logic. And what he did was he basically said, let's look at how the batteries are actually designed from the core source materials, and let's design a cheaper, more efficient way to do a battery. So he just rebuilt the battery. He put his brilliant engineering mind to work, and next thing you know, it was economically viable. And now Tesla, has influenced every other car manufacturer in the industry, kind of reinvented the entire concept of electric cars. And then Jeff Bezos with Amazon, he had this famous saying way back when, which was, your margin is my opportunity. Because again, Amazon was told by, the traditional big retail that basically like, there's no way that this could work. You're operating on way too thin margins. Like you can't do business like that. You're almost a joke. But what he realized that their whole paradigm of how they looked at margins in terms of how they sold, how they did business in this very linear fashion, he created a nonlinear system where he had this, Amazon marketplace where he could have razor thin margins to undercut everybody else, bring in more sellers to create more selection, more variety, a better user experience, drive the cost down, which then attracted more buyers, more customers, and more sellers in because they had more opportunity to branch out and get more sales to a bigger market. And it just all worked brilliantly, and so all the other big retail choked on trying to keep up with the cash flow that they thought were healthy margins, and he just starved them all out, swallowed them up. So it's very interesting, right? So it just goes to show that like in any area, you can apply this type of reasoning to your game. And I'll give you a very specific example of something that came up recently. So there was a thing in the group about, or a thread in the group about the arm triangle. And there was a lot of debate. Like it was interesting because it was about one particular finish, an arm triangle from was starting from mount. How do you finish the arm triangle? And it got a lot of attention, tons and tons, just on this one thing about different people saying like this and like this. I was just kind of observing and realizing how many people were so deeply invested in component thinking. And the danger of component thinking in any area is that it could work. You could be successful. But to me, again, going back to first principles, that's not the most important thing, because sometimes being successful can be delusional. Like, again, let's say you can tap everybody in the room, but you are, despite what you may think, using too much strength to get the job done, too much explosive energy to get the job done. It's like the guys that brag about, like, I got old man strength and I use it to, you know, crush the young athletic guys, ha ha ha. It's like, yeah, but that means your jiu-jitsu at least partially sucks because you're over-relying on physical attributes, right? So first principles, we go back to, let's forget about what so-and-so famous instructor said. Let's instead pursue the truth. So if we're starting from mount, right? I'll give you some examples. And I'll take off the gi jacket here real quick just so you can see a little bit better. If you could lay with your head towards the camera. No, you can keep that on, but it's my boy Arthur here. So let's say I'm starting here in mount, and a bunch of the things that I heard in this thread were, first of all the different finishes that will require me to dismount. I'm going to take those off the list right off the bat from first principles, because although it will work 100%, right, you can absolutely finish a lot of people dismounting. And yes, famous instructors have told you this is how they do it and they finish and everything. Argument from authority, right? It's not that it doesn't work. It's that all the primary defenses to that particular choke are going to take place if I dismount. So why would I? Why would that be something that I would build into the technique? Second thing with first principles, see a lot of people with various finishes to put on a ton of compression-based pressure. So some of the cues that I heard here, once we have the position fed, were, you know, palm to palm, ear to ear, come up high and drive all your weight down, right? Dismount, circle around the head, so on and so forth. Okay, all these different reference points for putting on a ton of compression pressure. And again, people will tap to all those. But here's the thing. If we go back to first principles, what actually mechanically needs to happen with the body in order to be submitted and to defend? I just talked about the defense, right? All the primary defenses are going to take place, aside from like answer the phone type of things, once you have dismounted. So first of all, we're just going to not dismount. As you know, in most all cases, that will be something we'll avoid. Second thing is, this is an arm triangle is a triangle, and it's a blood choke. All blood chokes are a triangle if you're executing them properly. It doesn't matter if you're doing a leg triangle, an arm triangle, an X choke of some sort. Any blood choke with a lapel is essentially creating a triangle choke pressure, and that means you're going against the arteries. And the arteries will require you to be as efficient as, if you're interested in being as efficient as possible, which should be inextricably tied from effectiveness, then you only should be trying to attack the arteries, which doesn't take a lot of force, okay? So if we just turn here for a sec, but here are the arteries, right? And what I want to do is make sure, in an arm triangle, of course, that my physical bicep is actually, my biceps on one side is making contact with the artery, okay? No space, making contact, not touching somewhere else and then hoping through a lot of compression that then I eventually touch the artery. I just want to touch the artery. So that's what I'm going to do on this side. On the other side, okay, if you imagine, because he's squared up to me when I'm in mount and the arteries are matching on each side, then what I want to do is not put my pressure way up here, ear to ear. And what I don't need to do is to drive my weight way down. Although both of those will work, they're going to be inefficient because it's using way too much energy and not in the right place. So I want to have a line going through to put pressure on this artery just enough, and on this artery. So Far side, my biceps will do it. Near side, it's his own shoulder, of course, because it's a triangle choke. So where should my ear go? Well, from here, I move my bicep through until it's actually touching his neck again, and it's actually resting on the artery. And once I have that fight, then I can just anchor my arm. And for me to clasp my hands together here really isn't necessary. Like, it doesn't really help whatsoever. But now from here, if I go ear to ear, I actually have to do quite a bit of compression before his shoulder actually finds the artery, because this is higher than the artery. So what I'm actually going to do is to move my hips back a little bit from here. And once my ear is in alignment, which is pretty much dead center on the shoulder in most cases, now I know my ear is aligned with my bicep on the other side, which means the pressure with just a little bit of a flaring in of my ear while I'm dropping my arm in the way I'm going to show you will do the job. Okay, so from here it's just a tiny squeeze, okay, and the tap is there. Okay, so right now I don't have a seal on the left side. Now I do. I feel the artery. Right now it's going to take, because I'm kind of ear to ear, ear to temple, ear to cheek area, it's going to take a long time. So I back my head up from here, and now I've got the right positioning. So when I just sink my shoulder into place on the left side and I just bring my ear in, almost no pressure required at that moment. Thanks. And then what I'm doing, and again, this isn't based on me being, invested in this is the way I teach or this is the way it was taught, so this is the way it has to happen. I'm only interested in first principles, how it works. So once I have this in place on this side and I know it is touching the artery, then all I'm going to do is align my upper arm bone over my forearm bone, lower arm bone, and I'm just going to sink into that space, and then my ear is just aligned directly opposite that contact patch so both arteries get touched. And there we have a great example that you can extrapolate into every other technique for how to put on in the most effective and efficient way, so you don't have to lose the balance of one or the other. And we can kind of get beyond thinking in terms of just reasoning by analogy and learn jiu-jitsu in a more holistic and robust way and solve a lot of problems without relying on somebody else to always give us the answer, because we know, based on just pure physical principles, what we need to do in order to be successful. Hope that helps.